I want to ask you a question. Imagine if following the victory of the Six-Day War, when Israel liberated the old city of Jerusalem and the Kotel HaMaaravi, the Western Wall, a Jew would have kindled a candelabra with oil enough to burn for one night, and it would last for 6 nights. What would be our emotional response? Certainly we would feel very good and happy for this show of heavenly grace. But you know that this would not be the critical story. The critical story is that 7 Arab armies vowed to annihilate all of the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. They wanted a second Auschwitz, 20 years after the first Auschwitz. There were 3 million Jews living in the Holy Land whose lives were spared as a result of that extraordinary victory during those 6 days, in which Israel was also multiplied many times over from its original size. That was the story. Even if this menorah would have not burned by the Western Wall, it would have not taken away in the slightest from the extraordinary salvation during the Six-Day War. And yet, when it comes to Chanukah, strangely, the focus becomes something that seems, relatively speaking, quite inconsequential and insignificant. The Talmud says in Tractate Shabbos 21b, when the Hashmonaim triumphed over the Syrian Greeks and they went into the temple and they couldn't find any pure oil, and they searched and they found 1 jug of oil and it could only burn for 1 night and it lasted 8 nights, they made a holiday of Chanukah for 8 days. And I ask you a question. Let's say they would have not won the war. Let's say the Hashmonaim would have been defeated by the Syrian Greeks. There would be no Jews left today. There would be no Judaism left today. It's the victory of the Hashmonaim over the Syrian Greeks in the year 164 before the Common Era that allowed Judaism and the Jewish people to survive to this very day. But what happened if they would have lit the menorah with the oil and it would have lasted only 1 night and there would be no menorah for 7 nights? What would happen? Nothing. They would wait till they obtained new oil and then they would light the menorah. And yet, in the Talmud, the focus of the celebration of Chanukah is the kindling of the menorah in the temple and the fact that the cruse of oil lasted for 8 nights. The answer to this, my dear friends, is simple and profound. The military victory of the Hashmonaim was something extraordinary and spectacular. It's something that we need to celebrate and be grateful for, and we dedicate the Al HaNisim prayer to that victory of the weak against the strong and the few against the many. And yet, sadly, the political and military victory did not last. The Hashmonaim re-established Jewish autonomy in the land of Israel. They got rid of the authority of the Syrian Greeks and their oppression. But you know what? The Hashmonaim dynasty itself descended into horrible corruption, strife, and civil war. Many of the Hashmonaim leaders themselves became assimilated and began to uproot Judaism from the Holy Land, murdering some of the great sages. A century later, they brought in Rome, and Rome took over Judea, and the Jews lost all of their autonomy. And a century later, Rome destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem, and the entire menorah and the entire independence introduced by the Hashmonaim was gone as an exile, a long exile of almost 2,000 years has commenced in Jewish life. So you see, as powerful and as extraordinary as the military victory of the Hashmonaim against the Syrian Greeks, it did not last. Therefore, the Talmud teaches us our main celebration of Chanukah is what happened after the victory of the war, when they took that little cruse of oil and they thought it would be extinguished after 1 night, but it proved to be inextinguishable. And this came to represent the power of Judaism and Jewish faith, that in the mightiest of winds and the darkest of nights, it would never be extinguished. And as Jews gathered each Chanukah to light the menorah, they sat and they looked at the menorah and they saw and they listened to the story that the flames represent. It's a story about one little cruse of oil that seemed to have so little oil that its light could not last for long, and yet its light continued to burn. And this gave them the message that through thick and thin, our light will continue to burn. Nothing can extinguish your own light. Nothing can extinguish the light of the Jewish people, and never will the light of Torah be extinguished. Happy Chanukah.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.